Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hera TV. My name is Mary Pagano. I'm a board advisor for Hera, the Light of Women, and I'm also the founder of Hera TV. So today we're going to have a discussion in line with our smart cities. As you know, Hera is building a smart green city for the future of humanity, for all genders, all religions, all nationalities, and there'll be a strong theme in honor of the women. So we want this to be a huge visit card for America, for the world, I guess I should say, not just America, but for the whole world. And I'm here today talking with Romi and Amy about some smart city solutions. We're going to talk about global impact and smart city financing. And so before we get started into our discussion, I'll let the both of you introduce yourself because first of all, Amy, I don't even know if I can say your last name right. So
Oh, no worries.
I'll let you start with your introduction.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Thanks for having us. So my name is Amy Zhuo, and I am a real estate private equity professional focusing on smart cities. So the real assets components include all the buildings and the infrastructure. And I am working on projects globally with a particular focus on trying to be innovative and sustainable in everything that I work on and invest in. It's definitely a new space in the entire industry. And as the technologies are improving, I'm excited to work on sort of all of the new projects that are coming forward, especially in this next decade. Romi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amy and Mary, for having me part of this panel today. So it's great to be here. My name is Romi Sumaria, as you can tell from my name, and Mary introduced me. I'm the founder of a company called the Oblique Life. It's a business I started with my two brothers just over 6 years ago. We're a global impact consultancy, and we kind of look at impact in three streams. The one is leadership. We really believe that we need better, more inclusive and sustainable leadership if we're going to have a chance of delivering as much social, economic and environmental impact that we want to. We believe in education, not just education from an academic point of view, but also a solutions-based and shared experience. And I think that's something that we try and bring together, and we run that through our podcast that we host. And we also believe in investing in the ecosystems that are of the future. So the startup ecosystems, the scale ups around impact, we invest time. And if we ever do have a few bucks lying around, we put some money in, invest in them too. But that's pretty much what we do. And I'm also involved in a variety of other projects around the world, looking at how to use future technologies and bring that to climate action, as well as mentoring different companies and individuals around the world. It's a pleasure to be here, Mary.
Oh, I'm glad to have you both. So this is such an important subject, I got to tell you, and I'm thrilled to have you both here. So let's get started, okay? My first question that I want to ask you is, what does a smart city mean to both of you, and why is it important? So Amy, you go first.
Yeah, I can definitely start with that. So for those of you who are listening who don't really have an idea of what a smart city is, it's definitely a buzzword right now. It includes both existing cities, so Stockholm, Barcelona, Paris, any city that is usually pretty big and metropolitan that is putting efforts into a more green city. So adding cycling lanes, adding technologies to improve traffic, putting more smart homes and policies about eco-building in the construction landscape. So that is a smart city that, it's all of our cities right now that are trying to be smarter in the ways that they're protecting the environment and sort of operating more efficiently and collecting more data to do it. And then there's the smart city that is what we call greenfield smart cities, which are built on a complete barren piece of land that was sort of nothing was there before. And that is what Mary and Hera City are building, which is very exciting. These projects are the sort of higher visibility really like trophy projects of almost each country has one that they're working on. And they have to build the roads from scratch. They're building often to accommodate for autonomous vehicles. They're building the water systems, the electricity systems from scratch, usually trying to target zero carbon landscape. So sort of all renewables, all smart buildings, and having everything interconnected using the Internet of Things. So these greenfield smart cities are also what I'm very passionate about, from the building landscape, from the investment landscape. And there's definitely a lot of opportunity to sort of shape the future and say, we are constantly building because we're a growing population that's urbanizing at a very fast pace. And how can we build smarter? Because we're going to build as a human race anyway. So how can we find models that work? And every country, every investor is trying to figure that out right now. And that's why we're at this inflection point where it's very exciting to see which technologies can be used.
Exactly. There's so much going on. It can almost be overwhelming. So Romi, same question to you. What does smart city mean to you?
Well, I think Amy's touched on quite a few of I guess, the kind of structural points of the smart city, and definitely the idea of bringing technology and the Internet of Things into the operation infrastructure of the cities. But for me, it goes a step further. I think sometimes when we think of the word smart, and maybe that's how it's been defined or being looked at, but if we really try to understand, smart is something that operates efficiently, something that uses all the resources around and also enriches the resources around itself. So for me, it's about how can a city build itself within an ecosystem? How does it connect with the natural world? How does it connect with the humans that live in it? How does it bring culture into the DNA of that city? I also think about regeneration or regenerative practice and circularity. These for me are smart cities where one input is an output and that output becomes an input again. These are what the cities of the future should be thinking about. And if we don't, that's where we start having the problems. And I guess a lot of the world that we live in, and even some of the smart cities today, are not thinking in that way. Yes, they come with the technology, the finance supports this new Internet of Things, or let's bring a new type of technology around energy distribution or finance. But what about the people? Where do they get left in this? Because at the end of the day, they're living in these cities. So for me, a smart city puts the people first. It brings their culture into play, and it also is about understanding and learning about the space and interaction of the natural world. So that's how I look at it. I definitely don't want to say that technology is not important, but I just think that we've perhaps got an over-reliance at times now on thinking technology is going to get us to the next stage, or technology is the solution. Technology is a medium for me. The end game is bringing them all together. And above all of that, I think what smart cities should also have is good governance, good people that governance that's inclusive, governance that's effective, and governance that can help the people rather than actually put people in weaker positions or marginalized individuals. So yeah, that's how I look at the smart city.
Yeah, you both are right on. And I know in the case of HERA, we want this to meet all the UN sustainable goals, as well as be very green, and not necessarily just use technology because it's cool. We don't want it to be invasive. And obviously there's a lot of ways to use technology very smart and very healthy. And I think that's really important for us as we build out Harris City. But the culture and the way we live, right? So I know a lot of people have probably seen the movie Ready Player One with virtual reality, and I'm not sure that's a world I want to live in. So I think we're taking
Metaverse.
Yeah, the metaverse. I think there's some great opportunity in it, but at the same token, I love the idea that I can sit on the green grass and have a picnic and watch the birds and do all that kind of stuff. So there's a great healing and love for Mother Nature and everything she's given us. Everything. I mean, there really isn't. You don't need much more outside of that, quite frankly, to survive. But so
yeah,
let's
I was just.
Go ahead, Amy. Go ahead.
I was just saying what you were saying about the green space made me think about how I think that actually has been sort of heralded by the urban planners as the smartest way to design a city, because there is so much data around how important green space is for humans and for humans to thrive, and walkability and all of that. So it's definitely not just about the technology.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also think, you talked about the metaverse, or this virtual world, Mary, and I think what we can learn from the virtual, there are some benefits, and there are some spaces that allow inclusion that would never happen in the real world, or the physical space. There's also this kind of interconnectivity that we can bring between regions, applied skills. And as I was speaking to somebody earlier today, these virtual spaces can become testing grounds or sandboxes for trying new ideas, and then maybe saying, well, look, this works in this way, now we can go and implement it. So I think what's really exciting is we're moving to a point now where if we have that core urban, the core urban design is based on the environment, the people, the cultures, but then we add this layer, we can bring that culture to that new space, and then it's opening up a whole new dimension. So the sci-fi in me is like, there is an exciting moment here. Maybe I'm just being super optimistic.
No, I think you're right on, Romi. I really do, because we're actually thinking about having a game developed for Hera, for people who can't come to Hera City, that they could create their own Hera City and possibly own some virtual land in Hera City. So there's a combination of both. But I just know that after watching that movie Ready Player One, I don't know if I want to live with a headset on my head. But I can see evolution, right? I mean, going from, a lot of people watch TV for hours at a time, and and if they can game for hours at a time and make money, then that's an interesting society, right? So, but you're right, the culture piece of this city is going to be really important. And as Hera TV, as we interview people, it'll be a combination of technology and culture and lifestyle and everything, because we want to hear from the people in regards to what they want in this city, because the way we look at it is that even though it's called Hera City, it's not our city, it's the people's city. So let's talk about financing. How does smart city financing work? And Amy, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of research into different smart cities around the world, especially with greenfield projects that I mentioned. So with the city projects with the cities that are already existing, those are almost always government funded. They hire private technology companies to come in and implement something like a city bike system. But for greenfield smart cities, it's much more complicated and much more varied across each country as well. Definitely the government has to be involved in some way because it's such a large development. So whether that's a land contribution, an infrastructure contribution, a special bond structure that allows for future revenue to pay for the infrastructure, or even a public-private partnership, PPP, as it's called in the industry. And that is probably the most common, the PPP, because governments definitely want to be as involved as possible when it's something that's very high profile in their country. It's very expensive, multi-billion dollars. The smallest smart city could be 10 billion, and what's being built in China and Saudi Arabia, those are $500 billion plus in construction costs. So the government definitely wants to play a big role while also crowding in private investors. So there's a lot of room for private investment to get into this risky game because it's so opportunistic. A lot of private investors have been hesitant, especially because it's hard to work with governments at times. You have the public sector wanting to do everything right and follow by policy and take their citizens first, and they want to usually take things a bit slower. And then you have the private sector, which wants fast returns and efficiency and sort of go, let's get this thing done. So the contrast between the two, and the third most important one, as you mentioned, is the people, the citizens' involvement. And citizens are usually not involved in the financing, although China has an interesting model of allowing citizens to be stakeholders
I like
in the
that.
project. Yes, the citizens who were living on that piece of land prior, instead of sort of receiving a payment to be displaced, like many other countries do it, China has an interesting model of allowing them to be stakeholders in the entire project. And that is definitely, I think, I think China as a communist country, we don't think of them as putting their citizens first, but I think in this particular case, it's an interesting model that democratic countries can look towards and respect. But yeah, anyway, so the financing part of it, it's usually infrastructure funded by the government, and then private sector funds everything else, from the planning, the architecture, the construction of the buildings, the leasing of the buildings, which is often the majority of the cost, actually, because we think about infrastructure as definitely a huge, huge expensive cost. But at the end of the day, the planning is very expensive. The construction always goes over budget. And it is often private sector investors that will take on that risk because it's the exciting project of the future.
Exactly. I think the whole private government model is quite exceptional. I worked with it many times over the years when I was in the technology space. So it benefits both, and I think it's a great way to make things work if possible. So Romi, same question to you. How does smart city financing work in your world?
Well, I mean, look, I'm not as experienced as Amy in the space, but I did spend some time in debt capital markets and looking at kind of fundraising from a debt point of view. And most recently, I've been looking at some companies that are developing solutions in the blockchain space and around green bonds. And I think what's interesting is that a big kind of bottleneck, even you have these incredible public-private kind of partnerships or models, but it's the smaller investments that get kind of stuck. 3 million, 5 million. These are hard to get financing for, and I think that's one thing I'm seeing that's quite interesting, because that's the kind of space where maybe we can involve more citizens or smaller players, and that's the challenge. We kind of end up with the financing, like Amy said, from big government or the big private sector, the big infrastructure guys, the big utilities, and then also the big funds. What ends up happening at that point then is that a lot of the regular people who want to be stakeholders and own their own, be part of the system, get left out. So I think what's interesting is when we move to a new form of financing with blockchain, we can innovate, and almost by decentralizing the whole financing model, we can also open it up to different players, kind of break it down so maybe different people can get involved and can be part of the funding system. By doing that, you create more stakeholders and more ownership of not just the asset, but also the city, also the brand, also the whole collective of it. I think the other side of it is green financing or social financing has been, the volumes have multiplied tremendously over the last 10 years. But one thing they still struggle with is the kind of reporting and the data and the kind of transparency around, are we meeting those metrics? And I think that's another area where kind of blockchain or digital finance is going to maybe revolutionize it, because suddenly now the data capture is going to be embedded within the products. Therefore, the interest rates people are paying are going to be automatically adjusted. They can't get around it anymore. And I think this is the kind of next level where it's not just we want to see more transparency across the board. And I think that's exactly what we can look at in financing. I think the other part of these cities financing is that in the developing world, it's also a lot more challenging. There's so much reliance on this aid coming in. So I don't know any examples myself, but that's one real challenge I see, is how do we open up financing to local participants? Because even in these developing countries, it's usually foreign FDI or big players. Whereas at least in Europe, you'll see a lot more cooperative level work happening, where you have bodies and government or sub kind of local government organizations that can challenge these big corp and the big names. So that's what I think we see less of in the financing side. So there is a bit of an inequity in the way the financing model works. But I think with the solutions coming out, better data, better data capture and more transparency, we're able to move to a model where hopefully we can start opening out this financing of these places. And like you said, and what Hera is doing is make it a city for the people, run by the people, with the people.
Right. Right. Oh, I like that idea. That's really brilliant, because I mean, we don't want to be one of those that are coming in with all these outsiders, right? It's really important to have the local community. It's their city. I mean, this is their country, and so we want to acknowledge all that and have participation. So we look at this as a city for the world, quite frankly. So we want the engagement of everybody in all cultures and all genders. So that piece of it is very important. So what are the risks behind some of this financing, Amy? I think you probably can hit on some of the financial and the pragmatic risks. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there has almost been basically no successful smart city to date, in the sense that if you define success as they built what they were planning on building, they have people moved in, it's a thriving, bustling city. So that is not the case for any greenfield city right now. A lot of them are half constructed. A lot of them never went through 10 years of planning and never even started construction. Many of them are somewhat ghost towns. So the risk is incredibly, incredibly high on so many different fronts. So you have the financial risk with the stakeholders, the public and the private sector disagreeing, suing each other. That happened in Korea. You have the government not sort of providing the infrastructure they promised, or the private sector pulling out and not delivering, not constructing what they meant to, not leasing properly, not thinking about the human aspect enough, where enough people want to move in, or not enough businesses want to move in. So I think these sort of misalignments between the public and private sector cause the financial risk of it not getting funded, it not getting completed, the returns not being achieved. And that is, I think, the most underrated risk and the most common risk as well. It's not that the geographical limitations or the sort of more human aspect of people disagreeing about what they think should be built in this new city. Most urban planners and architects and citizens, there's lots of stakeholder engagement because it is always such a high profile project. But the biggest thing is that it costs so much and it takes decades to build. And over that period, you usually have politicians change office, you have parties change office,
Yep.
You have different priorities within the political sector. So it really is hard to make sure that the government is always prioritizing it and sticking to what they promised. And at the same time, you have the private sector's sort of faults of being profit forward. And sometimes that means not doing enough stakeholder engagement, not thinking about the people of the country that they're building in, because often it's foreign. And sort of thinking in their ivory tower that, if you just do this, this, and this, if you build A, B, and C, and we're going to give you the money, and why can't we do this? And that sort of happened with Sidewalk Labs in Canada, where the Canadian government and the Canadian citizens said, no, we don't want you collecting our data. We don't approve of Google being here and commercializing our data. We don't want it to be commercial. And Canada pulled out of that project 4 years later and decided to build affordable housing instead. So it was definitely, I think in that case, potentially a misalignment of incentives in the first case, and also just not enough collaboration between all the stakeholders. And that sort of governance model that Romi mentioned, it's not about just when it's completed and built and everyone's moved in and living there that the governance matters. The governance of the project from the very beginning, from the planning stages, is where most of the risk falls within, and it's where most projects make mistakes. And if you make mistakes from the very beginning, it gets amplified as the project goes on. So that's where I would really advise smart cities to prioritize their efforts and making sure that their teams, governance, collaboration models are set up, conflict resolution models are set up before they go forward in this sort of long-term marriage of a project.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I watched that Sidewalk Labs project in Canada as well, and it was interesting. But I think I've been in technologies for so long, and people lost their data back in the 80s. They just don't know it. But it's discouraging. I think people are exhausted and tired of their data being sold and taken. I mean, it's everywhere. It's just exhausting. And hopefully we can get around that in Harris City. That would be our goal, is that you have your privacy and those things that are important. But it's gotten to the point that everybody wants your data. They want to know everything about you. So, and it is. So Romi, let me ask you the same question. What are the risks from your perspective?
Look, I think, I touched on it. The first question was that, what does a smart city mean to me? And that's about this ecosystem. I think that's the big risk, is that the way a lot of these smart cities start, or, they end up being executed, is that it's an investment model rather than an actual community building exercise. And I think that's really where we have a big risk, because if we say, like, look, let's start with a brand new city. Who's going to get moved into the new city? How do we decide which people are relevant to come into this place? Once they come in, who gets to be located where? Who gets what services? Also, what is everybody aligned already or educated to work with these new technologies or be in these new spaces? When it comes to schooling, how do we decide which boroughs are going to get what? I think the problem is that, and Amy mentioned it, it's about the right governance and having the stakeholder engagement. So that is really important, and it's very easy to kind of miss that piece out. Now, and it gets even harder when you have multicultural communities. Yep. You don't listen to them and ask them, why do they segregate themselves? Why do they have these areas? What do they need to make their life meaningful and purposeful? And yes, it may not make sense from a technological day-to-day point of view, but right, we have to respect their cultures. And I think that's something that's tricky. I think the other side of it, on the equity side as well, it's the kind of it's for me, is a lot about who. It's still, at the end of the day, the investor still is the biggest, is got the biggest voice. And yes, they put the money behind it, but they're not living there. And I think we have to change the dynamic of what power does the investor have versus what power does the citizen have. And right now, the citizen is the kind of receiver at the end of this massive chain. And yes, citizens are told in democratic countries, oh, you can go vote, you can go speak to your council, you can do this, but in reality, their agency is limited. And I think when we come to, I guess, modifying existing cities, that's what's really important for me. It's how do we shift more power to these individuals, but in a way that's, again, fair, but also in an educated manner, not with the right information. You talked about the data already. That's a massive risk, I think, with these smart cities. And I think also, in terms of and the utilities and how we run these systems, and there are a lot of new technologies being tried out in one go. We don't know how they're going to end up. I heard about a stat that a lot of these smart cities or these new cities start well in year 1, 2, and then in year 3, no one can afford the maintenance and running of them. Yes, they got built, they got invested in, but what's the longevity plan? How is it going to run itself? And these are big risks that we have to think about. And that's why, again, it comes back to citizen engagement. It comes down to, community building. So those are the kind of the risks for me. But I do want to say on a positive note, I do think as well that one big risk is just the fear of something different. And I think, if we do the right work and we, I think a lot of times there's a lot of skepticism about these cities, because they get, if you live in a really vibrant city center in the middle of, it could be a very old historical city, and then somebody tells you we're going to build a new smart city with all these features, but it's 100 kilometers outside. But we've got an amazing 20-minute train to get in. That's still not a pull factor, because you've lost all the cultural aspects. So for me, it's also how do you transfer and build this culture and share that through, because that's a really big part of cities. So these are some of the things I think about when I look at it from the human and, I guess, more sociological point of view.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I really like what you said there, Romy, about both the community and the culture, because I think a lot of, from the finance side, a lot of it is often from sort of assuming that culture and communities form naturally, that humans, once something is desirable, humans will move in and then they'll form their own culture. And as long as you have some arts programming, some, education and some cultural events, then everything will happen by itself. And I think that is definitely, we've seen that not be true, that community takes intentional effort to build. And I think you're a great example of someone who does that on a regular basis with the Oblique Life. And, it takes so much more than just people moving in and saying other people will follow, because it's this additional layer of what you said, the sustainability of it, of if it's so far away from existing cultural capitals in a city, it needs something long-term where people can say, I want my children to grow up there. I want to grow old here. And how can you say that about a place that has sort of no culture, I guess, except for technology? So you have the small minority of early adopters, people who are very into everything new technology, and the majority of the world is not there. They live and work, in a much more communal sense, and there's that human and emotional and sociological, like you said, aspect of it, and that's something that hopefully Mary and Harris City will be addressing in a way that other smart cities did not.
Well, I guess, and that's Amy, you're spot on. These are points which we think about, and also I guess it's the cost of these new homes that get built in these places. I mean, we can talk about the great infrastructure and the great public transport, but we've seen it in so many of our capital cities, London, New York, Hong Kong, Singapore, property prices are extortionate. The younger generation is being priced out on a day-to-day basis. So what's to say that these smart cities, especially when they're funded by private sector, are going to be more affordable? And that for me is also a big risk, because it's the young people that are going to build that generational culture and want to, build their roots in there. And I think there is a really great opportunity, because it's like, wow, okay, young people, they need, let's give them something to look forward to and to get their hands and feet stuck into. But now, is that possible realistically? And I think that's the affordable housing is such a big question, and there's so much, it's such a misty area where things are labeled affordable, they're called affordable, but it's more about the way the planning has gone and the deals are brokered rather than the actual end game. And yes, you may get an affordable house, but can you keep up with the running costs of that house, with your increase in energy bills, all the services you have to put in? So I think it all ties together. I mean, I think, like, I look at a city like London, New York, look at them. They've gone through waves of disruption and, plague and fires and pollution, but still they're still surviving, and they're still so there's got so much richness. And look at Mumbai in India. So this is something that I always look at, is these smart cities have to take these lessons from the most historical cities and say, okay, what can we learn from these places that keep people despite all their flaws, and how do we move them to a better place?
Yeah, boy, you know what? I've lived in New York City for 10 years, and when Bloomberg was running it, and I was always impressed with how he managed the city. And he made it affordable. He worked really hard to keep the lower and middle class to be able to live on the island, where there was affordable living. And when you think about Central Park, I mean, how do you keep from tapping into that land? I mean, the fact that they kept it protected for so many years as a green space, kudos to them for being able to do that. So, because I'm sure some billionaire wanted to own a corner of Central Park or something like that, but yeah, no.
Sure.
But you're right. It's really, the city is about the people and the culture, and I find that diversity is the most important thing, where you have so many different cultures and where people can get along and people can learn from each other. And here is also going to be a lot about education. How do we treat ourselves as human beings? How do we respect each other? And that's why we want to really make sure that we're welcoming all genders and all, nationalities and religions, because that's really what our future should be about. We're on one earth, right? One planet. So, we shouldn't be segregated.
Yeah, yeah. That makes me just like think about, so, obviously as a woman of color, this is something that's just hitting like all the spots. And I was so lucky to grow up in one of the most multicultural places in the world. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, and there's people of all religions, all color. Like I didn't even think about the fact that I was a woman of color until I left Vancouver for America. But it's something that I think in most cities, like nationalities or cultures or by language, they do, you have Chinatown, you have the Jewish neighborhood, you have these segregated pockets. And I think it's going to take, again, a lot of intention to stop that from happening. And I think Singapore did a really good job of that, in sort of providing quotas where every neighborhood had to have a diversity quota that they met. And I don't know if that's something you're considering, Mary, for Harris City.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it was very effective because they had 3 different cultural groups at the beginning of Singapore, and they wanted to make sure that there was no conflict. The key was to make their children go to school together and grow up together in the same neighborhood. And even if there was a language barrier, a religious barrier, cultural barrier, it's sort of, as long as you form friendships and see the other person as a human, it's definitely going to be much easier. And I think Hera City will also be self-selecting in that sense, where people wanting to live in a sort of utopic multicultural place, that's their safe space. And I think there aren't a lot of safe spaces in the world left in that sense.
Yeah, well, we definitely want this to be very safe. So, Romi, let me ask you this: who benefits from these projects?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've talked a lot about the challenges and kind of the risks and the negative side in a way of these smart cities, but there is a lot of positive. And I think, if I flip my own point about the young generation and where maybe they may be priced out, they could really benefit from this, because it's a whole city designed with new technology, with new purpose and technologies that are almost aligned with their generation. They get to be the custodians of this new world, and they can really own it. Now, the question is, how do we make sure that they're in those positions to understand that? And then I think also the planet can win, because if we make smart, better energy decisions, we create systems that are circular from the beginning rather than trying to add it on at the end. That's a win. I think nature can definitely be a winner, because again, we can put nature at the top of the priority list, rather than saying, oh, let's now try and reintegrate, or we've taken all the trees down, let's plant some more. We can make sure we start and we build around what's there. And I think I think there is a lot of space here to have human design led cities. Okay, we have the urban designers who build the structure, we have the civil engineers have to make sure it's safe and it's functional. Let's get the culturalists in, let's get the individuals, the people to design space. How do we put our art galleries and music? How do we create spaces of creativity? How do we create spaces of shared culture? And Amy was talking about it. You don't want to have these pockets of deep segregation, which have been kind of romanticized in many cities, because, oh yeah, like when you go to a city, I'm going to go to Little Italy, I'm going to go to Chinatown, or I'm going to go to this part of, and yes, they've got this romanticization, but we forget why they started. It's because a lot of them were marginalized communities that had to start in their place, and they've only become over the years more popular, and that's partly because they've probably moved to another part of town which you don't know about anymore. So I think it's a chance to say, well, we can still celebrate these cultures, but we don't have to do it in such a segregated way. And I think also the governments can win, because they can start being more efficient. They can find ways to distribute resources using data, using new technologies, using new financing methods. So I think there's a lot of upside in this, and who can benefit. I think how they benefit is tricky because it requires integration. But if we do think positively and we look at SDG 17 with partnerships, we focus on SDG 10, we look at make sure the genders are represented, education is prevalent, healthcare is delivered, I think there is a really good chance that suddenly we can be in a position where these smart cities really do live up to what they get talked about at the beginning.
You know what I would love to see happen is I would love to have city parks around the world have fruit trees and gardens in the parks where people can just grab food. I mean, this whole food insecurity thing makes me crazy. And when you can think about it just comes out of the ground and Mother Nature provides it, that, you know, why isn't there, you know, why can't we do something like that? I mean, it's
yeah, I think food security is definitely one of those community gardens, vertical farming, all of these innovations and trying to get each citizen food secure just from living in their city. Like you said, not having to necessarily buy anything. They could grow everything in a hydroponic machine on their patio, or they could go to their community garden and contribute a little bit of work every week, you know, teach their kids about nature and where the food comes from. I think there's a lot of power in that. And sort of like what Romi was saying in terms of who benefits, I really do see smart cities as benefiting the entire world eventually. So, you know, they are expensive projects. They are more often or not this sort of high technology. You can see it as, you know, only for the elite, but it's also a playground to experiment with ideas of how to build better, how to use new materials, how to have e-government and, you know, pilot it in a smart city and then have it benefit the entire country afterwards once you've tested it and perfected it. And that really benefits everyone in the world, the global south, the global north. You know, if we're trying to optimize everyone's quality of life by experimenting it and piloting it in a smart city, then eventually we're going to have this higher quality of life and hopefully reduce poverty for everyone in this world. And I think that's why we're all here.
yeah.
It's actually,
Go ahead, Romi.
no, so I was just, Amy, it's really interesting you say that, because I think like when we look at the global south and the places, was it Toyota that announced a few years ago at one of the big trade shows that they're going to build a smart city next to in Japan, and it was purely for experimentation of these new technologies. And it's funny because a lot of the best technologies we have came from space exploration, and that was, you know, a very expensive project in many ways. People question, oh, why are we spending so much money there? But we don't realize the residual technologies that come through it. Now, smart cities could be of the same mindset where we have a chance to work with new ideas, new social, economic, environmental interactions, and we can see what works on smaller scales before we scale it up. So absolutely, and I think you're right that there is that wonderful chance of taking these chances. And I think, you know, yes, there are risks we face, but I think that what you're doing in Hero with your plot of land, which is a really good size, it's big, you can show ideas on scale, but it's small enough to not, you know, to be able to work and develop and hone in and try different things. And I think that's what's the beauty of this, is that you can really build communities, you can really build a system, and you can look at how it interacts with the wider geography around you.
Yeah, when we design a house, right? I mean, women are all over the kitchen because they know how they're going to operate in the kitchen. You know, like you want the stove, you know, relatively close to the sink, and you know, just the way that the kitchen is designed, right?
That was me in my kitchen.
Oh, good, good. But think of it now as a city, you know, and how we live. I mean, wouldn't it be nice to be able to have everything so much easier and flexible that it's based on how you live and not necessarily everything about work, right? So, I mean, the last I checked, we came down to planet Earth to live, not necessarily work, but work. So,
Well,
right?
that's the thing.
Food on the table.
No, definitely. But
overwhelmed our life. No, it has. I mean, work has pretty much overconsumed our lives, and I think that there's a lot of people struggle, doing 2-3 jobs a day, and vacation, no, unheard of, right? So, and America still has a 2-week vacation policy. I mean, what is that all about, right? So, yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done on creating, a city that works for everybody and more human, right?
I just wanted to add about security as well, because I think that's something that we don't always think about in our existing cities, is that, our space is safe, especially particularly for women and marginalized communities. And, it's something that we take for granted. And this is, again, another chance to have a woman or a female perspective, or somebody who's marginalized, to say, hey, this is my problem. This is what I can't do in my city. When you build this new one, can you integrate my fears or my problem? And it's like simple stuff as street lighting and phone signal, and being able to not have to have the fear of walking down an alleyway which you don't know what's going to happen to you.
I've had someone say to me their biggest wish was, I want to sleep with my windows open.
Yeah. I mean, I have been living in South Africa for a couple of years now, and there's as one of the less safe places on earth. It's definitely something that's even more heightened as a woman. And I think obviously the goal is to not require lighting or cameras or, banning weapons to make us feel safe. Hopefully from the human aspect, we can just feel safe. But there's definitely a lot of opportunity to think about how do we shape both a city and also a society that is safer, from educating young men and from saying we're going to have a zero tolerance policy on catcalling, which is the most common daily thing that women go through in an urban landscape.
Yep.
And what could that look like? And I think Harris City might not be only the first smart city to succeed, but it would be the first city designed for women. And there's this book called Feminist City that I would highly recommend, that just points out all the little things about cities in the way that they were obviously designed by men for men. And how do we counter that? How do we change that? How do we undo that? And there's so much opportunity beyond safety as well. And it's exciting.
But it's even with financing, the finance model is made for men. It's not a, the way we look at what's a return, what's a risk. If you go deeper into it, it's exactly that it feeds off on that. And I actually met somebody at COP26 this year she was talking at conferences about, and her whole thesis is on what if today's big cities were designed by women, how would they look? And how different would they be? And we now have an example of, we can see what one could look like. So I think, yeah, it's absolutely right, Amy. I couldn't agree with you more. It's such a big piece. And if we can get that education piece in there as well, hopefully Amy will be funding a couple of cities in the near future with her incredible work, and we'll have multiple Heras all dotted all around the planet.
Yes, I mean, I would love to. I'm on a high floor right now, and I still can't sleep with my windows and doors open because my street is turned into a racetrack. So there's a lot of rev going down the street. So
oh wow.
But I would be very excited to be able to sleep with my doors and windows open. I think it would just, fresh air is more than everything. So you guys, we've got one more question here, and then we'll wrap it up. And you kind of probably mentioned some of this as we had talked a little earlier, but why have so many smart cities failed? And what advice would you have for Harris City? Romi, I'll let you go first.
Oh, sure. I mean, look, I can't talk again. My data points on why they failed will have to be passed on to Amy. But I think I can really share with, as Harris City, you're building a city in a country like Morocco is an exciting project, because you get to go into a country that's got so much rich tradition and culture, and such actually a very big, like a very secular society in terms of different tribes and groups of people. You have an incredible chance to open that out to technology and to these innovations that we're building around the world. It's a great chance to, put new energy systems in and show people that the old ways of collective living can exist. I think the key thing is getting the young people involved. I really do believe that. I'm a big believer, but also try and make sure that we don't lose that generational mix, because what we don't want is a city where you just have one end or the other. You want to have them both learning and communicate together. I think arts and culture, like one thing I tried for many years with Oblique, my company, was to support emerging music, art, film in London, and I still really live by that. But I used to find it crazy that you go to all these bars and amazing music talent have to play covers, and I'm like, they've got their own music. What are we doing if we're not letting creativity be true to itself? And I think that's the best way to express and see what society depicts from their own mind and from their own eyes, and creating spaces for this collaboration and encouraging this creativity to flow gives an identity to a place. Then if you add on all the good infrastructure and the good models, the internet, the data. And I think also the other thing is just not to be scared of the technology and embrace it and see how we can use this future, the metaverse, blockchain, the NFTs and gamification to work with the progress. And that's what I'll just say is there's so much exciting and great things in front of us. It's how to bring it together, but bringing that culture, bringing the technology, and then having that kind of society and that community feel, for me, is exactly how my hero can make it. But I'm not even I've never built a city, so these are just some conceptual thoughts from a guy that believes in the incredible work that you're both doing.
Oh, thank you very much, Romi. Amy, what about you?
Romi, I really like what you said about the sort of citizen-centric, stakeholder-centric perspective. I think that's something that's a big reason why smart cities fail, as we were discussing before. And stakeholders, not just in the citizens and future citizens of the city, but between the government and the investors, and sort of how do we all work together in a way that will actually make this dream come true. And I think one of the biggest reasons why smart cities fail overall is this concept of being overambitious. So to counter a little bit what you're saying with, it's so exciting, there are so many opportunities, there's a million technologies. That's what the vision usually is for a smart city from all stakeholders. And what often happens is that someone realizes the technology is not ready, or it's too expensive, or the vision from a geographical scale is too big. The amount of zero or negative carbon footprint is near impossible. And so it's this saying, how can we shoot for the moon, but then be able to achieve these baby steps in between? Because if you only shoot for the moon, that's how all smart cities have failed, pretty much, is trying to be too visionary, incorporate all the technologies, respect every single person's opinion to the point where nobody agrees and nothing moves forward. So there's this pragmatic sense of it as well, of we want to build something one day that is utopic. But for now, what can we build with the resources that we have that, please as many stakeholders as possible, protect the environment as much as possible with still getting the project done. And I think it's that sort of the person who's kind of, I wouldn't say holding something back, but, just being realistic and saying, no, maybe we can't desalinize all that water, or maybe we can't build a hyperloop in the desert. But it'll be this back and forth of, and I think that's my advice, is that it's a balance, and it's trying to be as ambitious as possible without trying to do everything at once, because over complexifying it is going to result in a failure most often, as what previous smart cities have shown us. So that would be my advice, is to collaborate, to not be overambitious, to be very pragmatic about what is achievable, and to have a team that believes in each other from all the different parties involved, to listen to the citizens and the stakeholders, like Romi mentioned.
Brilliant. I think that's a real, and our founder of Hera, the Light of Women, Marinella Mapuri, is probably one of the most pragmatic people I've known. So, and she's truly about action. And when you look at everything that she's achieved, she's also working to get plastics out of the ocean with a product that's going to replace plastic. So, she's a busy woman, and we've got a great team on the Hera team, both the board advisors and ambassadors. So I think you guys gave us some really great insight to think about, and really look forward to working with you guys in the future as we build out Harris City. I welcome any feedback, really appreciate it. I will put your details, in the notes here of this session so people know where to find you, right? Before we disband here, is there any last words or any final things that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Oh, Romy, you're muted.
I'm saying, Amy, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, last words, I think it's just very notable to point out that this is a project made by women and made for women. And that is something that has never existed in humanity before. In my industry, it's like 99% men. And I think also, especially in Morocco, where there's going to be a lot of cultural tensions between this sort of ultra inclusive, ultra feminist model and maybe more traditional beliefs and ways of thinking, that I'm just excited to see what this project can show the world, what is achievable when something is women-led and has women at the forefront of building something. So thank you for working on this, Mary. And I can't wait to see the outcome.
Thank you.
You put it so nicely, Amy. And I think, first I just want to say it's been a pleasure to be on the panel with Amy. She's super smart and inspiring, and I look forward to working with her. And Mary, it's not easy to do the work that you're doing, but the fact that you are says it all. This is the kind of work that needs to be done. I think, I started at the beginning talking about the ecosystem, and I think if we listen to nature and we build a city that's right for that environment, that's what's going to be exciting. And I think, Amy alluded to people looking at desalinizing water because it's possible. And I think that there is a limitation, because it's like, well, does it make sense to do that really? Like when you can do something else. So these are the things I'm really excited to see. But also I think it's a work in progress and it's evolution. And I think, the beauty is you have people like us and a huge community of other people who want to see this succeed. And, that's what's really powerful here. You let the power of collaboration bring those people together, make the right changes. And I look forward to supporting you on your journey and helping in any way that me and my community can. So thank you for having us here. And Amy and I are looking forward to book our tickets to Hera City.
Yay. So my final thought to this is, women are 51% part of the global population, but yet we're represented less than 10% around the world. And I think women have this amazing innate ability with emotional intelligence to take care of family, take care of community. We prioritize humanity. I'm not saying that men have done an excellent job. They're great at, building and making money and doing all those kinds of things. But I think it's a time now where we need to stand side by side and really work together and collaborate, because we've only got one planet, and we need to take better care of what we have and the way that we live and the way that we treat people, and how we respect humanity. So I'm really looking forward to Harris City, and I really appreciate your guys' time today. So you brought some really great information to the table, and I'm really pleased with that. So thank you for joining. I love your energy, and I love what you guys are up to. So thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us, Mary.
All right. That's it today for Hera TV. Thanks for joining today. We really appreciate you coming and listening. So if you'd like to participate in Hera TV, you can reach out to us at heracity.org. And I will post your Amy and Romi details on the recording. So thank you, everyone.